It's time to take on two controversial topics today. Not one, but two. Gray zones and junk miles. Are they a real thing? Are they not? Should we worry about it? That's what we're going to cover today. So let's dive into it. So, what are gray zones? Let's start with that. Gray zones are this idea that essentially there's certain training intensities that if you spend time there, you're not getting much of a bang for your buck, meaning you're not getting many adaptations for the work that you're putting in. A lot of this came from when we transitioned to a zone-based model. Meaning, as you are all aware of, we have these different training zones depending on what system you use, either 3-zone, 5-zone, 6-zone, 7-zone, there's all sorts of zones. But the idea essentially was this, is that there's certain training zones and intensities that are tied to a certain adaptation, and if we spend time in that zone, we'll get that adaptation. So the idea around these gray areas were essentially, hey, there's these spots in these zones or certain zones which don't give you much. In the original Jack Daniels running formula, in fact, there was a chart, a pyramid, that showed the different training zones in his category with a little literal gray area in between where Daniels warned, like, hey, I wouldn't spend much time here. There's not much physiological bang for our buck. And often these zones where we didn't have these gray areas were tied to things where there wasn't a physiological parameter that was close to anything. So for instance, it wasn't close to lactate threshold or VO2 max or whatever other ventilatory threshold, whatever marker we had. So it largely came out of the physiology, but that was a mistake. And Daniels later corrected it because he had in his books, one of the gray zones was essentially kind of longer marathon pace tempo runs or plus or minus that kind of steady marathon pace effort. And he later corrected in his work. He said, I made a mistake. That's not a zone, a gray zone. We need to train in that area. And here's why this happens. And what happens is we tend to tie physiological markers to this must mean it's important. Meaning we train at lactate threshold because there's a lactate threshold there. We train at VO2 max because we reach VO2 max there. There's some validity to that, but what we know now is that what really matters is we're applying a stimulus to get a variety of adaptations. We can't just isolate things specifically. That's because our physiology works more like a dimmer switch instead of an on-off switch. When you start running, you have all of your energy systems are on and working to some capacity. Depending on the intensity, some may cover more of the load, but it's not, hey, we move from this one to this one to this one. No, we turn them all on, okay? It's just some aren't utilized as much at different paces or need to cover the load. Same thing if you look at muscle fiber recruitment, okay? We don't turn them all on at the same time, but what we do is we get a progressive recruitment of various slow twitch muscle fibers because they can cover the load and force requirements at lower forces and intensities. But as we increase the force requirement or the fatigue, we have to call in more mixed fast twitch, slow twitch fibers than more fast twitch fibers to handle the load. So what we have here is physiology is more complex than the zones. And training in a specific zone doesn't necessarily mean this is the only way to adapt this thing. So I'm going to give you some examples. So if you look at the research, if we're wanting to improve VO2 max, well, great. What do? Maybe we do the Norwegian method, 4x4 minutes that's so popular. That's supposed to increase VO2 max the most. Well, it can. Does it increase the most? Depends on the study. Why does the study vary? Because adaptation varies based on the individual and what you're able to handle. So, a study by Norwegian scientists found that 4x4 minutes increased VO2 max the most. Steven Seiler found that 4x8 minutes was more effective. And Veronique Billat found that 30 seconds on and off was more effective than 3 to 4 minute intervals, essentially. What do we do with this? We understand that it's not about gray zones or maximizing zones. It's stimulus and adaptation. It's what Renato Canova, the famed coach, told us when the lactate threshold needs to be pushed up and pulled up. Meaning, to varying degrees, you need to run under the threshold to try and push it up. Sometimes you need to run a little bit over, sometimes a lot over to pull the dang thing up. Where you are depends on the individual, the event you're training for, where their background is, and all of that stuff. So my answer is there are no gray zones. There are more appropriate training intensities for getting some adaptations, but those vary based on the individual. So instead of getting this idea of like, oh no, I better not do that tempo work, that longer tempo work because it's in a gray area. No, it can have some value. But what we think of when we say gray zones is we don't want to just get caught only in a few select zones. Some people say only zone 2, zone 5, forget the rest. No, that's bullshit. You're missing out on adaptation. That is creating your own gray zones of adaptation. You need to run the gamut. Mostly easy, a little bit moderate, a bit of hard, depending on the goal and what you're training for. But every pace, to some degree, needs addressed and will provide a different stimulus. It's why if you look at swimmers or someone like Mihaly Igloy's training and Bob Schul, who won the gold medal in the 5K in 1964, their training looks crazy through a distance runner viewpoint. Because it's all intervals. Igloy was all like 100, 200, 250 meter repeats short. You're like, where's the volume of it? It's because they're manipulating the rest, recovery, and speed to get various adaptations. Their training doesn't fit in a nice, neat zone model. Okay? So again, why am I bringing that up? Think stimulus and adaptation. What stimulus am I applying? And what sort of adaptations do I get out of this? So think of it like fast twitch versus slow twitch fibers. Should most of my easy runs be relatively easy and controlled? Sure. But if I go a little bit faster and dip into high zone 2 or low zone 3, am I ruining things? No. All I'm doing is training my kind of blended, mixed fast twitch, slow twitch fibers. I'm bringing them into the fold and saying, hey, we're going to train you high-end aerobically. Is that the optimum training intensity for those like really easy recruited slow twitch fibers? No, probably not. They need more easy stuff. But if I never train my kind of blended, mixed fast twitch, slow twitch fibers, intermediate fibers in an aerobic environment, then they're going to suck when we call upon them in the race because they're going to be called upon because everything else is going to be fatigued. So the point is, we might be training a smaller pool of fibers, but we still need to do some work to train them so that we can access them and they're trained aerobically and get some of these adaptations. You can apply that same logic in all sorts of forms, but it's why all zones matter. That's my pitch. All zones matter. All right, let's go into junk miles really quick. This is a favorite of people for whatever reason. Junk miles are like this. Is people say, oh, no, you're going too slow. Can't run that easy. You get no adaptation. At least here we're thinking in terms of stimulus and adaptation. We're saying, hey, there's probably a minimum threshold to get some sort of adaptation. And there is to a degree. There's a dose response curve, right? Where a little bit higher dose, we get a little bit better response. But those dose response curves aren't linear. They're more curved and depending on what the adaptation is. So the dose response curve looks different for mitochondria adaptations in slow twitch fibers and fast twitch fibers. Looks different from mitochondria to capillarization. Looks different to central VO2 max and cardiac adaptations. There's many dose response curves. Okay. But here's what we know. When it comes to easy running, it's not just about the physiology. Some of it is about the structural adaptations to be able to handle the mileage and workload, and going easy allows you to gradually build those in a relatively safe way because the pounding or force requirements is lower. So we increase that. It's also, if you look at the literature on running economy, a lot of it is you need to spend enough time doing the activity. And this is why volume tends to correlate, and especially volume of easy running, correlate with running economy improvements. Why? Because we need to repeat the activity long enough where structurally, metabolically, everything adds up to where we can become really efficient at it. When we look at novice, newer to intermediate athletes, there's a reason they run their mileage slow. It is because the name of the game is we need to build volume somehow. And in order to handle building volume, they have to go slower. They can't handle and bounce back from faster, steady running yet. They need the load to adapt before they can handle intensification of this. This is why everyone from Arthur Lydiard to Ernst van Aken all said, hey, the point is to get the volume high enough. Frank Shorter, who said as much easy mileage as you can handle. They all knew that from the structural adaptations to the adaptations of delivering oxygen to utilizing it to processing, that takes time. And the better we create better roads and highways and more trucks and trains to deliver that metaphorically and more mitochondria or powerhouses to sort through that, the better off we are. And that takes time. I keep repeating this, but there's a reason. Because it is the relative volume of training that matters. Now, at some point, as you adjust and you adapt to the volume of training, sure, does it make sense to bring a little bit more intensity to your runs? Absolutely. Stimulus and adaptation. You start being able to handle running faster on your easy days and still bouncing back and recovering so you can do the hard days. So it's a balance here, but I hate the term junk miles. And one other thing that I want to point out here is that junk miles, these easy runs that are very slow, often serve a vital recovery purpose. So, for instance, if you look at the research, the volume of easy or recovery running is often tied to an improved HRV, okay? Tells us autonomic system is recovering and bouncing back a little bit better. If we look at recovery runs, guess what? When we go for a very easy recovery run, we get a boost of HGH, human growth hormone. What is that? Well, people take it illegally to help them bounce back and recover. You get a boost, and even if we look at the frequency of it, so if we do 2 short, easy doubles of 30 minutes, 40 minutes, something like that, we get a double boost of HGH. Research also shows that after easy or recovery runs, it improves our perception of readiness for a hard workout. We feel better getting ready to take on things. All of this is to say is that there is a reason that study after study, whether we look at relative amateurs all the way to the elites, shows that over a long time horizon, the volume of easy running is often what best correlates with performance. There's a reason elite athletes spend 80 to 90% of their time in this easy to recovery, or we'll call it easy, steady-ish to recovery. I'm going to break down that a little bit right now, actually. If you look at Moses Mosop's training, an elite marathoner, he ran 2:03 in Boston way back in the day, coached by Renato Canova. If you look at the training he did leading up to one of the cross-country championships where he did really well, 54% of his training was done at recovery paces. 27% was done at what was called general easy running, which is basically to say it's easy to steady, but not that hard, can have a full conversation. For him, it's minutes slower than marathon pace. I believe recovery pace was, for him, anything slower than low 6-minute pace, which sounds fast, but when you have a guy running marathons at whatever it is, 4:40 or better pace, guess what? 6:10 is recovery. If you look at Kipchoge's training, former world record holder in the marathon, first guy sub-2 in a controlled event, there are many runs where he starts at 6 minutes per kilometer. Not 6 minutes per mile, 6 minutes per kilometer. He is trudging along. Now he gets faster during those runs, sometimes much faster. Other times he keeps it relatively controlled, meaning 6 to 7 minute mile pace. Still very controlled. The point is this, is that the junk miles idea came out of the 1980s and 1990s Sebastian Coe era, where Coe essentially said, quality over quantity, this is what we need to do. This is why essentially white people, Europeans, are running slower than their East African competitors. We need this. And Coe ran really fast, but he was a miler, 800 miler, fast twitch oriented athlete. And his advice works for those kinds of athletes. But for most people, it does not. Most people need a variety of easy paces to get a higher volume and can't sustain the daily steady runs or steady efforts. Now, if you're only running 20, 30, maybe even 40 miles a week, you can handle more intense, easy runs because you're not doing that much volume. But again, research tells us we need a decent amount of volume to maximize our performance. And this is what we see with the Kenyans. It's what we see with the founder of the Norwegian double threshold training, Marius Bakken, who, yes, did a whole ton of threshold or sub-threshold work. But on his recovery days, he said, quote unquote, I trained with my girlfriend, which meant he ran slow. He ran slow. Now, I just want to end with this, is that there's variation here in fast twitch versus slow twitch athletes, right? More fast twitch orientated, you're not burning fat as much, so you're going to dip into more carbohydrates the quicker pace you get. So that affects kind of the recovery. Slow twitch athletes, you can run faster while still burning fat at a high level, and like it'll shift the training adaptation a little bit, or the training, I should say, damage a little bit, because slow twitch muscles fibers are going to handle a lot more volume than if you're more fast twitch orientated and you dip into those sooner. So that will adjust things. This is often why Coe was able to run really fast in his easy runs and not keep the volume that high, because he was a fast twitch oriented athlete and like he didn't need to train slow twitch muscle fibers quite as much. So anyways, there you go. 2 ideas. Gray zones, BS. Junk miles, BS. Now, if all you do is run slow all the time, are you going to get better? A little bit at first. This is why Pavel Nurmi got better doing long walks than other people way back in the day. They did long walks, gave some sort of adaptation, aerobic adaptation. And this is why with novices or even intermediate athletes, long walks will give an adaptation and serve as a recovery standpoint. Now, at some point, you're going to have to graduate beyond long walks because it serves such a small stimulus. And the same is true for easy running if you're trying to get adaptation out of it. But it can serve a purpose for recovery. But the point is this, is if you're sitting there thinking, junk miles, I can't go slow ever, you're missing the boat. You're missing the boat. You need really slow, easy, relatively easy, moderate easy, kind of moderate steady, and everything in between. And that's what we learn from athletes like Kipchoge or Moses Mosop, who, if you look at their training distribution, for some like Mosop, from 7+ minute miles all the way down to god awful fast, everything is touched on to a degree. So don't fall for the junk miles or the gray zone stuff. Every intensity has a purpose. So until next time, don't forget, check out my book, support my work, all about the mental game to help you perform up to your potential, both in running, but more so in life. Check it out. Hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe, support the channel, leave a comment if you have any questions. Take care, everybody.